Hello everybody, my name is Falkman and welcome to Cyberpunk 2.0 Ultimate Cyberninja build guide. This build is very dynamic and does incredible amounts of damage, and the playstyle itself is basically like playing Doom, but instead of a double barrel shotgun you got either a katana or mantis blades and some throwing knives. The gameplay mostly is just going from enemy to enemy, performing those brutal finishers introduced in patch 2.0, and also using a Sandevis, which is just so good in this update. Additionally, I personally like to use pistols with this build, but honestly it is up to you what other weapon you want to use with this build. I'll talk about that later. So let me tell you what can you expect from this video. First, I'll start with perks and attributes, explaining what works well with this build and why. Then I'm gonna talk a little bit about the CYBERWARE and what works best to kind of min-max this build, and also what weapons work best with it. And then I'll explain the game plan, so the rotation of abilities and so on, both in combat and in stealth. And lastly, I will mention some leveling tips and tricks, and also some bugs to watch out for, because unfortunately Cyberpunk is still a buggy game. I hate to break it to you, man. So if you want to skill up your V from level 1 gank to a maximum level of an absolute Cyberninja unit, then let's get this poppin', baby. As I've said before, let's begin with the attributes and perks. Basically, the most important attribute trees for this build are reflexes and tech. So for this build to even work, you need 20 points in those two. Now, as for the body or cool, it really depends on your playstyle. If you just want to use the Cowabunga approach most of the time and only use stealth from time to time, then I'd say going 20 body and 18 cool would be the best. Although if you want to put more emphasis in your gameplay on stealth, then feel free to go 20 cool and 18 body. And just so you know, don't worry, not investing those 2 points in body won't make you a glass cannon or anything. With this build you'll be able to do incredibly well in combat, but those 2 extra points in body would allow you to do even better in combat, so it's totally up to you. But let's focus for the priorities, which is reflexes and tech. Now, starting with reflexes, this is basically what the perk choice here looks like. Now, the middle part of this tree basically allows you to just do more parkour, but to be more specific, it basically unlocks dash, which you can perform on the ground and midair. It's an extremely powerful ability. It basically makes V faster than cars, which is kind of weird, but that's what it is. But with this build, it helps massively to close the gap between enemies. As for the perks I haven't picked here, like Steady Grip and Mean Streak, these are good for shooting while dashing, and for this you need Karenzikov, which I won't be running with this build, so that's why I haven't picked it. As for the Multitasker and Muscle Memory, it depends if you want to use guns with this build or not. I haven't picked this perk because you don't need it to throw knives while sliding. It really only just affects guns. Also, I haven't picked Aerodynamic because I don't think it's that great, but if you feel like you need more survivability, then it's probably a good perk to pick up. But let's get into the nitty-gritty, which is the blades part of the perk tree. So the first big perk allows you to block projectiles with blades, but if you get the bullet deflect, it allows you to, well, deflect those projectiles, if you get enough stamina, that is. But there is one perk that is absolutely essential around this area, and that is Flash and Thunderclap, which makes your strong attacks leap toward an enemy. So this mixed with dash completely eliminates any gap closing problems. You can basically move from enemy to enemy without having to run in the meantime taking damage. But anyways, another massive perk unlocks finishers, and those finishers are very brutal, like I've said before, but they restore 25% of your HP, giving you iframes during the finisher, and effects like bleeding, blinding or stun basically make enemies susceptible to those finishers, and also them being low HP. Additionally, thanks to the perk Going the Distance, you don't have to be super close to an enemy to perform a finisher. And as for the last perk of this tree, it basically makes finishers pop up more. And that is it for this tree. Now don't worry, I will explain those abilities while I'll be talking about the game plan, but for now let's focus on the talents and let's go to the tech tree. So if it comes to the tech tree, the perks on the left side of it basically help out with health item recharge, which is something incredibly helpful in this build and very important. But the perks in the middle increase your CYBERWARE capacity, and this build relies heavily on CYBERWARE, so I highly recommend getting those perks. But yeah, that's basically if it comes to the tech. Now let's talk about body. These perks on the bottom help a lot with survivability. Next perk, which is the Adrenaline Rush, basically adds a shield in form of extra HP after consuming a health item, which is mega good with this build. And as for the last perk, it is not super necessary, but it basically just makes V almost unstoppable. And that is it for body, so let's go to the last attribute tree, which is Cool. And here, honestly, things get a little bit tricky, because this is the tree that you kind of have to start prioritizing which perks you need more and which perks you don't really need. Now, as I've mentioned before, as for the third weapon of choice, I decided to go with silenced pistols with this build. So aside from the throwing knives and the middle perk tree, I will also explain what I picked for silenced pistols. But anyways, if it comes to the middle tree, it basically allows you to do better in stealth, which, as I've mentioned before, is a viable option with this build. It also allows V to crouch sprint, which is useful in stealth scenarios. But honestly, one of the best perks is creeping death, which gives incredible bonuses to using optical camo CYBERWARE, which I will be using with this build. Alright, but if it comes to the throwing knives, there are a few perks here that really just help out with stealth. But the first major throwing knives perk is Scorpion Sting, which basically just applies poison to enemies that you get a crit or a headshot on. If you also get neurotoxin, those poisoned enemies also get affected by bleeding, which, if you remember from the Blades perk tree, it also makes enemies more susceptible to finishers. So that's a nice combo. Accelerated toxin absorption basically allows you to get a big hit on poisoned enemy, so it's pretty good for boss fights, but for regular fights it's not that major. What is major though is the Juggler perk, which, just like in the previous version of the game, allows you to get knives back on crit hits and eliminations. And all the other perks attached to this one basically boost the damage of throwing knives, and finisher of course unlocks finishers, so I highly recommend getting pounds to get the better distance for those finishers. And also, as a bonus, you may want to get Road Warrior if you want to use Sandevistan while driving. But before I go into CYBERWARE, I just wanted to remind you that all the leftover perks that you have by this point, I recommend spending into the perks representing the weapon that you want to use as your third weapon of choice. And for this build, I went for stealth pistols, so these are the perks I got to boost the damage from those weapons. But the choice is yours, so if you want to use shotguns with this build or gorilla arms or whatever, that is totally viable. Oh wait, I forgot about the relic stuff. For combat, I definitely recommend weak spot detection, is just extremely good. But if you're mostly using stealth, then I recommend the optical camo perk, which makes enemies lose sight of V after using optical camo in combat. But anyways, that is it for the perks. Let's get into the CYBERWARE. This is basically the CYBERWARE that you want on level 60. So starting from the frontal cortex section, there is one piece of CYBERWARE that truly unlocks the full potential of this build, and it is the axolotl. And you can get it either after going to Dogtown or by doing all the Regina gigs, as she will send it to you now instead of giving you the Neo Fiber like back in the days.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
But what Axolotl does is it lowers the cooldown of your CYBERWARE per elimination. By a lot. It does cost a lot of CYBERWARE capacity, but not without a reason. With this build, V goes super fast, eliminating an enemy after an enemy, so this CYBERWARE basically allows you to use Sandevistan for almost all the duration of the fight. Not literally though, because the game kind of forces you out of Sandevistan if you use it for too long, but then you can just use it again and the cooldown is refreshed. And that is basically it if it comes to important stuff in frontal cortex category. So going to arms, I've chosen the electrifying mantis blades, mostly because it does nice damage to robots, which you fight a lot of in Phantom Liberty for example. And also there are some cool relic perks that make mantis blades even stronger, but if you want to use gorilla arms or projectile launch system instead, it's absolutely okay because katana is more than enough for this build. As for the skeleton CYBERWARE, I used bionic joints and universal booster for extra armor and some other bonuses, and dense marrow for extra armor, but most importantly more melee damage. There is a higher stamina cost for melee attacks, but with this build, the stamina is not something you worry about. As for the nervous system, adrenaline booster makes V much faster in the beginning of combat, which is very useful, and stabber CYBERWARE increases the crit chance with blades. As for the integumentary system, I recommend subdermal armor for the armor because it's really cheap and it gives a lot of armor. Optical camo if you either want to be stealthy or if you somehow run out of cooldown for the Sandevistan, and proxy shield build decreases the damage the closer you are to the enemies, and you will be very close to the enemies, so it's great for survivability. As for the legs, I use reinforced tendons for double jump, but if you prefer on using something else in that slot, that's completely okay. Now if it comes to the circulatory system, there is one powerful combo that I mentioned in my previous build, but it will work here as well, and that is Blood Pump with Biomon. Biomon basically automatically heals the player when the HP drops below 35%, and Blood Pump is basically the best healing item in the game. So both of those combined are just incredibly powerful, especially that thanks to your very wise perk choices, you have 3 stacks of healing items, which is for example Blood Pump. And additionally in this category I recommend Heal and Kill, because getting that extra HP per elimination just keeps the momentum up, because there is gonna be a lot of eliminations with this build. As for the hands cyber, I recommend the Handle Wrap because it's awesome for throwing knives, and as for the Kiroshis, I recommend the Cockatrice Kiroshis because they add plus 30% crit chance, which is absolutely massive. But let's talk about the crown jewel of this build, which is the Militech Apogee Sandevistan. In my opinion, this is the best Sandevistan that you can get in the game. It is just so powerful thanks to those incredible bonuses and the slow time, and if you go fast enough with it and combine it with Axolotl, the cooldown is basically non-existent. But just FYI, you can only buy this specific Sandevistan once V is level 40, as this is basically the level that legendary stuff starts showing up at vendors. Alright, so that is it if it comes to the Cyberware. Now let's talk about the weapons for this build. So starting with the katana, honestly there are plenty of good iconic katanas in Cyberpunk, but there is only one that is the best, and that is Byakko. Now what's so good about Byakko is that after an elimination, V gets into an absolute beast mode, making around 300 attacks per second. It is extremely good for normal enemies and also for the elite enemies, as unleashing this flurry of attacks deals just incredible tons of damage. And also getting this weapon is extremely easy because all you gotta do is finish all the Wakako gigs, and there is just 8 of them. But after you're done with all her gigs, she sends you Byakko as a reward. So next up is the throwing weapon, and here I generally use the neurotoxin knife on my V, but if you want to min-max this build, then I guess the best choice would be the hatchet from Phantom Liberty, and you can loot it from the boss of this enemy area over here. And as I've said before, third weapon is totally up to your preference, but since I went with stealth pistols, I used the Her Majesty gun from Phantom Liberty, and if you're wondering, it is a reward from one of the story missions. And the last thing here if it comes to the weapons is the accessory, and due to no one's surprise, I use the optical camo here, which helps out a lot in stealth but also in combat if you run out of Sandevistan somehow. So now that you know how the build is made, then let me teach you how to play. But to be fair, the game plan is very easy for this build. So starting with the Kawabanga approach, which means that you are not afraid to get detected, I still recommend eliminating as many enemies in stealth as possible. And not for any kind of buffs or anything, but mostly because it's just faster. Stealth gives you a lot of extra damage. So you can either use throwing knives in the beginning or just use the katana and Sandevistan to get enemies that are outside of the larger groups, as that way there's a lesser chance you get detected. And from that point on, just go from enemy to enemy with Sandevistan on, and as you can see on the video, you can just do heavy attack which leaps towards an enemy, or you can dash and heavy attack if you're very far away. Every elimination gives you so much less cooldown on Sandevistan that you don't have to worry about it, so if the game forces you out of it, then just click the button again and get Sandevistan working again. If it comes to the finishers, you can perform them on every enemy, but to save time you can just perform them on the elites, mostly because the regular enemies are extremely easy to eliminate with the buffs from Sandevistan and from the Byakko Flurry state. And that generally is all the game plan. Now as for the stealth approach, it is a little bit more tricky. As for this, you probably want to use throwing knives, takedowns and katanas occasionally. Remember that now if you eliminate an enemy who detected you fast enough, they won't alert the rest of the group of enemies. So you know, that's one of the reasons why using Sandevistan in stealth is just incredible. But anyways, with this approach you can just pick off the enemies that stand out from the bigger groups the most with throwing knives or Sandevistan and a katana. If there are any elites, you can stealth take down them, and with bigger groups you can use Sandevistan and a katana to avoid detection. But be careful with this, as you gotta be super fast, because if someone shoots, then everybody is alerted. But also if you run out of Sandevistan cooldown or if you are performing a takedown, then remember you can use optical camo, which will help you with not getting detected instantly. And I know that it may be a little bit of a general game plan, but that's essentially all of it. It might be a little bit confusing in the beginning, especially that you have a lot of abilities at your disposal, but once you figure out the Sandevistan and the range of the leaps, it really is easy. So even though that is it for the game plan, there are a few things you might want to know, and these are unfortunately the bugs which this build suffers from a lot. So let me shortly explain to you what to watch out for while you're playing. First of all, don't ever pop your Sandevistan during a finisher animation, because it will just eat up your whole Sandevistan usage and will slow you down as well as the enemy. Second of all, if you get to combat and perform a dash on the enemy, sometimes it really gives you that mega dash that just teleports you half through the map, but if you do it from midair onto some uneven ground, you basically get stunned. So you know, it's also not good. Also, the elite enemies sometimes take 2 finishers to finish them off. Hard to say if it's supposed to work like this. Also be careful, because if you turn off Sandevistan during the finisher or a takedown animation, it speeds it up and kind of bugs out. It's not much of an issue with the regular enemies, but if you perform a takedown on the larger boss and get out of Sandevistan during that time, it does bug out the fight a little bit, so be careful with that. And mostly that is it if it comes to the bugs. So let's go to the last section, which is the leveling. So since this guide is already quite long, I will just give you the most important information here, okay? So as for the starting attributes, you want to distribute 6 points into reflexes, 6 into tech, and 4 into cool. And if it comes to the attribute prioritization while leveling, I highly recommend getting to 15 reflexes, 15 tech, and also 15 cool as fast as possible, and then getting body to 15 as well. And once all those attributes are at 15 points, you want to focus on reflexes and tech to get them to 20, and then getting either body or cool to 20 as well. Now as for the Sandevistan to use while leveling, I recommend the Dynalore Sandevistan, which is available from level 10, and then you can keep upgrading it until V is level 30, because at level 30 you are able to buy the Militech Falcon Sandevistan, which is much better than the Dynalore Sandevistan, so it will probably make the gameplay much easier until you get to level 40 and are able to buy the Apogee Sandevistan. Now as for the leveling playstyle, I would mostly focus on the stealth until level 20 something. Then after getting some Cyberware and getting some better Sandevistan, you should be able to survive longer in the fight. And what should get you to level 20 something quite fast is dealing with Regina and Wakako's gigs immediately after the prologue. And of course it's worth it for the XP and for the rewards like the Axolotl for Regina gigs and the Byakko for Wakako gigs. And as a big tip for the gigs themselves, remember, if you find any kind of a camera, shaft, or a door that is unlockable by technical ability, then remember to use that ability, because it will help you skill up tech, which will not only unlock more perk points for you, but also some other bonuses, and most importantly more Cyberware capacity, which is fantastic. And also if it comes to additional perk points, after you finish the prologue, you can basically roam the city and collect perk shards, which give you 1 perk point per shard. And those can be found in some specific locations, and I do have a video about it. It's gonna be right there in the description. And also while you're leveling, remember about upgrading your shit, man. So you know how it is, disassemble some stuff, get them components, and upgrade your equipment. And just so you know, if you're not familiar with the new tier system in Cyberpunk, then the common items, so the white items, start appearing at shops and are available to loot from enemies at level 1. The green items start from level 10, then blue stuff starts probably somewhere around level 20, then the epic stuff starts at level 30, and legendary at level 40. And as the last thing, I wanted to mention the drip of my V, because lots of you guys ask about it under my other videos, but all of it is modded, so all the mods will be in the description if you are interested. Whew. And yeah, that is all for today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I gotta say, it was a lot of work to put all of this together, although not as much work as with the Netrunner guide. But anyways, I really appreciate all you guys' comments and likes. It really helped those videos pop, so thank you so much. And also please let me know if I forgot about anything important, because well, that was a lot of information to cover in that video. But as I've said, that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you later. See ya.